Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be doing my October wrap-up, and I am so pleased to say that I did such a great job of reading almost everything that I had on my TBR. There were one or two things that I pushed back for other books, but I read like the vast majority of what I had planned, and I just feel like so good about it that I was able to actually like stick to my list and to my TBR, because as you know, I'm a mood reader, so usually things tend to change. I don't know. I was just like, I'm gonna crush this list, and then I did, and it was great. So anyway, I'm going to talk about all the things that I read this month, starting with Lost Sisters by Holly Black. This is the Taryn novella that Holly wrote. It takes place in between The Cruel Prince and The Wicked King, and it's basically a letter from Taryn to Jude explaining her side of the story of everything that went on within The Cruel Prince. I have to say that I really loved this novella, even though I still really dislike Taryn. She is definitely not a character that I see myself sympathizing with at any time, but it was interesting to see events from her perspective. I also like that it was written in second person with Taryn describing the events to you as if you are Jude, so it feels like a very personal letter. There's really no new world building or anything within this book. It's essentially The Cruel Prince, like completely retold but severely condensed and from a different perspective. And despite my desire to hate Locke, I still find him really interesting, and he's a terrible character, and I should like him less than I like Taryn, but I don't. I like him more. And I would say that Vivi actually had my favorite line within the whole novella about how it's easiest to be mad at the people closest to us instead of the people that truly deserve it. And I ended up giving this one 5 stars. I'm sure there's no surprise there. The next book that I read is One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. At the time of filming, this book has a 4.07 average rating on Goodreads with over 76,000 reviews, which is such a high rating, and I have always been really intrigued by it. The premise really was something that I was drawn to when the book was first being released last January. It's essentially a young adult thriller, and it has the kind of tropes that you see in The Breakfast Club. There are 5 kids who all get detention, and each of them fulfills like a very specific stereotype, but one of the kids does not make it out of detention alive, and the rest of the students that were there become the main suspects in the case. This book is super controversial. If you have seen other booktubers talk about it, a lot of people have a lot of issues with it, and while I do agree that there is definitely like a very poor portrayal of mental health, I think I went into it with very low expectations, so I was pleasantly surprised. I found the book to be really easy to read. Like, I just was addicted to finding out what was going to happen next, and I really liked the characters. And I will also say that there were a couple of things that I felt like I was led to believe were worse than they actually were. For instance, Addie's mom says some pretty questionable things, but I never was under the impression that she was like a good person in any sense, and I knew like she says terrible things because she's a garbage human. I really liked Bronwyn and Nate as characters. Bronwyn was like the brain, and Nate was like the bender of the book, the kind of like bad boy. I thought that their storylines were the most compelling, and while I did see what was coming at the end, I still found it enjoyable to read, like getting to that point. I think I just really liked Karen's writing style, and her pacing was just so perfect that it really like kept you hooked as you kept reading. I'm definitely gonna be reading her next book, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. The next book that I read was Nightblood by Ellie Blake. This is the 3rd and final book in the Frostblood saga, and I have talked about this series a whole bunch on my channel, but again, it is an Avatar: The Last Airbender inspired series, except it focuses on frost and fire as opposed to having all 4 elements within it. Throughout books 1 and 2, we have major tension that has already been there and just continues to build between the Frostbloods and the Firebloods, and everything really comes to a head here in this final book, Nightblood. We follow Ruby, Kai, and Arcus as they all face off with the Minax, and I really don't want to say much more than that because I don't want to spoil any of the plot in this finale. This book was very quick paced, and it had a lot of plot twists, which lent to a very quick reading experience because I kept wanting to know what was going to happen next. But I will say that the ending included a trope that I feel like has been used a lot recently in young adult fantasy novels. I'm getting a little bit tired of it, so I was a little bit disappointed with that. I also, like in the previous books, I absolutely loved Arcus and Ruby and Kai. I did feel a little bit disconnected from Ruby in this book. I'm not sure what it was because I was really looking forward to it, and I just recently read Fireblood, so it wasn't like I had forgotten anything from the previous books. It just wasn't gripping me the same way that the first two books were. The second one was by far my favorite in the series. But I still think that this is a solid fantasy series. It's a really good series to binge read, but overall I ended up giving this finale 3.5 stars. Next, I read Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. This is the conclusion to the Strange the Dreamer duology, and it was by far one of my most anticipated books of this year. Let me just say, this book completely delivered. I've been having a very good month with series finales, so it's really good to go into this knowing as little as possible. So the very bare bones of the story are that we follow Laszlo Strange, who is a librarian who was literally shaped by stories. A book fell on his nose and now he's a crooked nose. And then we also follow Sarai, who is our Muse of Nightmares. So Laszlo has always been drawn to the lost city of Leap. Through a series of events, he ends up getting to go and explore the mystery and find out kind of what happened there. And this is the conclusion to that story. So I've heard some other people describe Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares as being akin to a written dream, and I have to say that I could not put that more succinctly myself. I think that this is so beautifully written. That's really what gets you. They're definitely slower reads because you tend to savor every single sentence and every single word. It's just so gorgeous, and I found myself constantly rereading different paragraphs over just because I was like, what? How could anyone write something this beautiful? One of the things that I love most about this series is that while it is a fantasy series and there are opposing forces at play, there's really no clear villain in the story. We just get two sides of a story, and they're two sides that both have their valid points. It's really just these two sets of people with different backgrounds trying to figure out a way for everyone to live peacefully. I just think that it's such a great lesson because there's definitely more than one way to do things. There's not always just a clear this is right and this is wrong. People can get to the same kind of conclusion through different means. I think this is a great reminder that you should be open-minded and accepting of other people and other cultures and other races. As always, Laini's prose is just unparalleled. I keep finding myself going back to certain favorite quotes within the story. My absolute favorite quote is right at the ending, so I can't say it and spoil it, but it's so good. One thing I will say is that there were a lot more romance scenes in this book than I was anticipating. I just didn't see that coming, but all the same, I really, really loved this book. So this is absolutely one of my favorite series of all time, and this is a very, very strong 5-star read. Next, I read Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. This is a new middle grade novel by the author of The Bear and the Nightingale, if you're familiar with that book. I truly loved it, so I really wanted to see what her middle grade would be like, and it's kind of spooky, so I thought it was a good Halloween read. It follows a girl named Ollie, and Ollie is dealing with the loss of her mother. She has kind of found comfort within books, so she feels very attached to them, and one day she runs into a woman who is about to throw a book into a lake. So Ollie obviously saves that book and takes it back to her home. She reads the entire thing, and it ends up being a very spooky story. And then the next day her class goes on a field trip to this farm, and then she's finding a lot of the things within the book that she just read seem to be true. I really enjoyed Ollie's story, and I really enjoyed the creepy vibes and just how atmospheric it was and how spooky the scarecrows were and the mist. I will also say that there was one line in here that was straight out of Over the Garden Wall, which I love. So that I was just picturing the Pottsfield scene. If you have watched that, you'll know what I'm talking about. So overall, I did want a little bit more out of this book. I do know that it's middle grade, but I just felt like there was something that was kind of missing for me. I thought that it was a fun story, but I did think that the ending was maybe a little bit rushed. And after loving her adult series so much, I just felt like the writing was a little bit simplistic and not as lush as I was expecting. This felt very much like a Goosebumps book to me, and I was really hoping for a Coraline or City of Ghosts type book. So I ended up giving this one 3.75 stars. Next, I read Fake Blood by Whitney Gardner. This is a graphic novel, and oh man, this was so cute, so adorable, and just perfect for October. So I was planning on reading half of it at night before I went to sleep, and then the other half when I woke up in the morning, but I ended up reading the entire thing in one sitting because I just could not put it down. It follows this sweet little boy named AJ who has a crush on this girl, Nia, and they both go to the same middle school together, and the two of them end up getting paired up for a project about Transylvania, and AJ knows that Nia is obsessed with vampires, So he steals his sister's copy of Moonlight and he starts trying to act and dress like a vampire to catch her attention. And then he finds out that she's actually a vampire slayer and it is hilarious. I have to say that I really appreciated all of the Twilight references. I thought it was so funny. I was like laughing out loud while I was reading this. I also really loved AJ's relationship with his older sister. I thought that was super cute. And I would really like to live in AJ's room because it is beautiful and full of books and like lights, and it was just so cute. That's his room. It's so adorable. I love his bookshelf. He has like so many books. But anyway, I just really loved how like sweet and open and vulnerable AJ was, and I thought that his friend group dynamic was really cute. I definitely foresee myself rereading this book at some point. I love the artwork, I love the coloring, and again, I just completely ate the story up. I thought this was amazing. This is definitely the perfect read. Next, I read The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. You guys have no idea how thankful I am that I gave this book another shot because, as you might know, I tried to read it last summer, but I had just gotten some bad news about my mom's health and I just really couldn't get into the book. Like I needed something light and fluffy as a distraction. So I ended up putting this one aside after like 70 pages, always with the intention of getting back to it. And I finally got back to it this month and oh man, I loved this so much. So basically what you need to know is that it follows a magician named Etta who is able to time travel, and she goes back into the early 1900s in order to steal this book from the Order, which is an organization that has kind of like stamped out magic. They created this thing called the Brink, and that tears magic away from magicians, so there's almost no magic in present times. The bulk of this book takes place in the early 1900s in New York City, and oh my gosh, was I captivated. I just thought it was so interesting to see different parts of the city during that time frame, like places that I am well aware of now, and just different characters from history that were prominent figures within New York, like JP Morgan and Charles Schwab, just to name a few of them. I thought that the initial 70-ish pages of this book laid a lot of groundwork. I thought the beginning was very exciting, but then it kind of slows down a bit as you get familiar with all of the surroundings and all of the many characters that are within this book. So if you are starting to read it and you're struggling a bit, I would say to push through to at least the 100-page mark. Then the story just completely picks up from there and you will not be able to put it down. So like I said, there's all that groundwork in the beginning, but as you continue to read, the payoff is far above and beyond anything that you could even imagine. Certain characters will cement themselves in your heart, and by the end of the book, your mind will be completely blown. There are so many plot twists, so many things that I just did not see coming by any means. And I'm so thankful that there's a second book because I really want more of these characters and I really want to find out where the story goes from here. I would say that it could have ended with this book, but it also does have the opening for a second book, and I'm just so glad that there is one. I need it. This book kind of gave me Diviner's feels without the creepiness factor because of the historical New York setting. But it's interesting that it takes place even before the 20s, because I feel like the 20s is the time frame that is way more explored than the early 1900s. I don't think I've ever read a young adult book set in the early 1900s. But it just made me feel completely immersed and addicted to the story and to everything that was going on in here. And I also so appreciate this cover after learning the significance of that symbol as I was reading. I just really, really love this book. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. Next is a book that I was not expecting to read, but I got an early copy and I was really excited about it. So I read The Devouring Gray by Christine Lynn Herman. This book actually doesn't come out until next April, but I just couldn't wait after reading the description and it just seemed so perfect for October. So I ended up reading the whole thing in a day and a half because it was so good. It's described as Stranger Things meets Riverdale, and that is completely accurate. I've also heard it compared to The Raven Boys, which I can also see. I personally also think that it was Over the Garden Wall, my favorite. Let's see how many times I can mention Over the Garden Wall in my videos. It takes place in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley, which is where I've always wanted to live, in this spooky little town that is haunted by a beast in the woods. It mainly follows a girl named Violet who moves to Four Paths with her mother and finds out that she is actually one of the descendants descendants of the founders of the town. And it is up to her and the descendants of the other founders to keep the town safe, but everyone has a lot of secrets. And then bodies start appearing and the locals start getting very angry and start revolting against the founders. And it was just so like spooky and atmospheric and amazing, and I really devoured LOL. Christine Lynn Herman's writing style. It was so beautifully written. I think she did a really fantastic job of balancing the multiple perspectives, but still maintaining Violet as our like most prominent perspective. It was fascinating to learn about the founders' history, about the rivalries between the families, and the impending threat from the beast. The ending pretty much had me dying for the second book, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. It was incredible. You guys have to have this one like on your radar because it was so good. And I also ended up giving the Devouring Gray 4.5 stars. I read Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas, and oh my god, this book, it left me completely broken. Like, completely. I think Sarah did such an incredible job of wrapping up this epic fantasy saga and giving all of these characters the ending that they truly deserved. The payoff for the reader who has stuck with the series for all this time was just like beyond. It was so good. Anytime that someone would ask me how it is while I was reading, I would tell them the truth, which is it felt like Sarah reached into my chest with her bare hands, pulled my heart out, threw it on the ground, stomped on it, put it back in my chest, ripped it out again, etc., etc. It was just heart-wrenching thing after heart-wrenching thing. Everything was so high stakes. There was so much going on. So many of these characters lost and sacrificed so much in order to reclaim Terracin. It was really just such an incredible journey, and I could not imagine a more perfect ending than the one that we got in this 1,000-page monster. I feel like I've been wanting this book for ages, and now that it's over, I am just completely devastated, and I already want to reread the entire series. The day that I finished, I had to cancel the plans that I had to go out with people because I was just so emotionally drained that I could not even join society once again. I was so like broken, and I was just like, I need a very large cup of tea and a very cozy blanket and to just like lay down and not talk. And I'm not even exaggerating a little bit, that like legit happened. This was obviously a clear 5-star read for me, as I was expecting it to be. Another thing that I will say is that as much as I love the Court of Thorns and Roses series, I was kind of disappointed with ACOWAR. Reading how amazing Kingdom of Ash was made me feel even more disappointed in ACOWAR, because this was just like so good, and I was like, she can write such an epic ending, and we just didn't get that in ACOWAR, so I was like feeling more disappointed in that one. But this was just, everything. 5 stars. And then lastly, I read The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy by Mackenzie Lee. This is one that I had also been highly anticipating. It follows Felicity, who is Monty's younger sister, and Felicity really wants to be a doctor, but obviously she is living in a time period where women are not accepted and nobody takes their career ambitions seriously. It was really frustrating to read about her going and like trying to follow her dreams and having all of these like terrible men just shut her down and like be able to do that. I just wanted to go and like pull her into our time period so that she could go and like be the doctor that she's always wanted to be. It was really fun to see Percy and Monty once again. They're just so great, and their cameos were amazing. Felicity, I have to say I loved hearing from her perspective. I think that she is so funny, she's so logical, and I really liked her friendship within the book with Johanna, and the two of them end up going on this journey together and getting into all of these antics, and there's another character named Sim. And again, I just really loved all of the female empowerment, and I really loved the way that they each supported each other in the things that they were trying to do. And yeah, it was just so enjoyable. It had like the same kind of humor as The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, which I truly enjoyed. There were a bunch of times when I was laughing out loud at different scenes within here, and this was such a quick read. I love that you get to go to so many different areas. Yeah, it It was so fun. It was like exactly what I wanted, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. And that is it. Those are all of the things that I read in October. It's actually a couple days early, so there's a good chance that I'm gonna finish another book before October ends, but I will talk about that in my November wrap up, obviously. Not that you need to know. I just like feel guilty and like need to tell you that I might finish another book in October. I'm sorry. That's all that I have for this video. Let me know if you've read anything that I mentioned. Let me know if you also died after you read Kingdom of Ash, because relatable. And yeah, that's all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!